All right, so we're just at 9:31. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are here to talk about current trends in underage drinking and substance use. So today's presentation is being put on by the Governor's Prevention Partnership. Here at the partnership, we work to enhance the youth prevention and mentoring framework in Connecticut by providing trainings, technical assistance, and other collaborative approaches. We connect people, programs, and communities to the resources they need to positively affect the lives of Connecticut's youth. I will be your presenter today. My name is Jessica White. I'm a program manager, communities and schools with the partnership. I have a background in education and youth development, both with a teaching certification, and I worked before my time at the partnership for about 10 years, running youth programs both in schools and out of school as well. So it's a really important topic that we're here to talk about today, and I'm excited to share this information with you. A little bit about our time today. So our conversation will go for approximately 90 minutes. We will have time at the end for a question and answer session. So you can save all of your questions for that time. And we will be sure to send out follow-up materials. We'll have resources and a recording of our webinar today. So what will we cover today? So our first topic will be really talking about adolescents. We'll talk a little bit about the milestones that they experience and what are some important factors and circumstances that influence their lives today. Then we'll jump into the statistics around substance use. Specifically, we're going to focus on alcohol, cannabis, vaping, and prescription pills. And then we're going to end with just some solutions of how we can help our young people grow up substance-free. So I want to start just by hearing a little bit from the audience. So when we say teens today, what are some of the things, phrases, thoughts that come to your mind? You can throw them right in the chat there. Activists, TikTok, a couple of TikToks, trendsetters, bruh, Brittany, I like that. Independence, social media. Yeah, you guys are right on. These are all huge, huge things that are influencing and impacting their lives. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. Impulsive, that's another one. Screens, vapes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for your input. So we know that adolescence, you can just think of it as a huge time of growth and transformation. Right, we see a lot of physical development happening in this time. You start adolescence as a child, and then you end in your growing into your adult body. Adolescents experience puberty, so there's lots of hormonal changes and other things happening inside their bodies. This is also a major time for identity development. So we know that adolescents are actively constructing their identity, right? Trying new interests and hobbies. For the first time, they become really concerned with who they are and how they're showing up in the world. And these are major, major driving forces in their lives and in their decision making. We also know that adolescence is a major time for brain development, and this is something that wasn't well understood just a couple of decades ago. So we know that the last part of the brain to mature. Well, actually, let's stop there. Can somebody throw into the chat? Do we know about what age it is that the brain reaches full maturity? Yes, 25, exactly. So it's in your mid-20s, right, which is something that, like I said, wasn't well understood. We thought that once you kind of reach 18, adulthood, that your brain stopped developing, and we know that that's not true now. There's massive pruning that's happening. The neural connections that are established are being strengthened and really solidified during this time. That's one of the reasons that we know over 90% of addictions start in the teenage years. And a lot of it has to do with this brain development that's happening. When adolescents are engaging in substance use, it can impact their behavior and it can impact the way that their brains develop and form, which can sometimes have lasting impact for the rest of their lives. Another unfortunate theme that we see with young people right now is that there, for a couple of decades now, has been a slow and steady rise in the rates of teen depression. And this is especially true for our young girls. So some statistics to illustrate this are 70% of teens say that anxiety and depression are major problems among people their age. So they're very aware of this as well, right? They know what's going on. Definitely a problem that is come to their attention. 30% of teens in Connecticut report feeling sad or hopeless, right? Those are our markers for depression. So that's very concerning. Almost a third of our young people are saying that they feel depressed. And this is even more true for our females. 2 times as many females reported feeling sad or hopeless than males. And that's an unfortunate trend that we're going to see throughout this presentation when it comes to a lot of different areas. So a lot of people brought up social media and different technology, internet platforms when we asked about teens, and that's true. Social media and digital technology is a huge driving force in their life. But there's some pros to it too. We've seen reports of young people saying that they go online to seek health information. A lot of young people said that social media helps them to feel connected and have social support during times of isolation, like quarantine for the pandemic. So it's not all bad. However, we know that social media can exacerbate and really compound some of the risks for substance use. A great example of this is cyberbullying. Bullying behavior in general, both for perpetrators and victims, is known to act as a risk factor, right? Bullies and victims are more likely to engage in substance use than young people who are not engaging in bullying behavior. Cyberbullying adds a whole new dynamic to this because bullying is no longer regulated just to the school walls, right? It's pervasive and it can be everywhere in your life because of social media. Further, social media opens up new avenues for social comparison and peer norms. These are huge driving factors for our adolescents, and now social media has a constant stream of pictures, comments, reactions, all in real time from your peers. So it just adds a new level of intensity to what was experienced before. And many researchers are pointing to this as contributing factors for the increases in depression and anxiety. That this constant social comparison really leads to more internalizing behaviors. Additionally, we know that when youth are posting and creating content related to consumption, specifically of alcohol, that they tend to depict risky consumption, right? It's very glamorized. They're showing how fun it is. People aren't really talking about the embarrassing decisions that they made when they were drinking last night, or how hungover they feel from consuming too much alcohol the night before. It's a very one-sided story that's not giving a complete picture of what's happening. And then finally, we know that 2 things, peer alcohol behavior and alcohol advertising, are huge influences offline of underage drinking, and online, they take on a whole new dynamic again. I just spoke a little bit about peer alcohol behavior, but even alcohol advertising, right? It's really easy to just go and follow someone or, an alcohol brand, for example, on social media. There's not a lot of regulations and things that are preventing young people from doing that. Additionally, social media really blurs the lines between creating content and marketing and advertising. So for example, I think of like the new trend of celebrities having their own alcohol brand, right? The Rock, Michael Jordan, Kendall Jenner, there's literally dozens and dozens of them. But maybe you're following The Rock because you really like his movies or something like that. And then he's advertising his alcohol brand, right? Well, our young people are being exposed to that through very unconventional marketing and advertising these days. Additionally, social media creates new levels and avenues of access to substances, not only to the actual substances and drugs themselves, but also to paraphernalia. So I have 3 different social media platform logos shown on your screen here. And these all kind of work together to create new access. TikTok often acts as the marketing platform. So if you're not familiar, TikTok is a social media platform where you can make short videos that they have music and text. There's lots of dancing, and they're can be really fun like that. But sometimes dealers use them to showcase their products, to show what they have. Sometimes there's demonstrations, things where they're teaching people about new products and new paraphernalia, so on and so forth. And then they might put their Snapchat handle in their post or somewhere in the caption, something like that. So potential buyers can contact them on Snapchat then. If you're not familiar with Snapchat, that is a messaging app that has text, videos, pictures, you can send all of that through there. The novelty of that is that once the message is opened by the receiver, it only lasts for a few seconds and then it disappears and you can't see it again. And if you try and screenshot it, it sends a message back to the sender so that they know that you did that. So it's a good way to keep conversations covert, that people can't go back and see and read the transcript of the exchanges that were happening. So sales will be set up through Snapchat, and then Venmo, the last one, is how the transactions are happening. That's where money is exchanged, and other arrangements there are made. You can also see to the left on your screen, there's some common emojis that are used and related to different drugs and substances. You can see there's marijuana, they have a broccoli, Christmas tree. We'll talk a little bit more about these. Some of these are, the old school kind of covert codes that we've used, such as the snowflake for cocaine, or a snowman, plug for your drug dealer, that's your connect, something like that. So emojis really take on their own life. It's their own language that's used to have, covert conversations that everybody might not know exactly what they're talking about. All right, so now we're going to jump into what some of the trends are. So we have some promising and interesting news from the last year. So in December, NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, released a press release with this graph in it showing that between 2020 and 2021, through their Monitoring the Future survey, they actually recorded the largest decrease in youth substance use since they started the survey in 1975. So that was actually a really surprising and unexpected finding. We know that last year, 2020 to 2021, was pretty much a complete anomaly of a year. Many of our schools were not operating fully in person. They had distance learning or hybrid options. Because of the pandemic, people were not socializing nearly as much. People were spending much more time at home. So it's not really clear exactly what caused these drops to happen, but it's definitely something that grabs our attention and is worth looking into more. Thinking about, did peer pressure show up differently in young people's lives? Was it the presence of more adults being at home, either from working from home or changes in employment status, so on and so forth? But we'll definitely be interested to see moving forward what this continues to look like and what the lasting long-term impacts are. All right. So we're going to jump into alcohol now. So some good news about alcohol also is that we are continuing a decline in the rates of young people drinking. However, we're starting to see as of 2020 that decline is slowing and starting to level off a little bit. So on your screen, you can see these are national statistics of binge drinking and also past year alcohol use. And it illustrates some of the trends that obviously our younger adolescents, so 8th graders, that's the blue band, are engaging less in substance use, and it increases more the older that the adolescents get. But still, startlingly, about 55% of 12th graders in the United States, over half of them, report that they have used alcohol in the last year. So it just really speaks to the prevalence that's really widespread for our young people to be engaging in alcohol consumption. So what are some of the things that can influence underage drinking? Well, like I said, we know that alcohol is the most prevalent drug. And really, we know that environment also plays a huge role. So we think about things like community norms, right? What are young people seeing others in their community doing? How are people engaging in alcohol? Are they seeing responsible consumption, or is there people that are maybe using alcohol to cope in an unhealthy way? What are the media messages that they're being exposed to? What kind of social media, movies, music, things like that are they seeing, and what is the messaging that's being communicated with that? We also know that access and availability are major influences in underage drinking, and COVID certainly had an impact on this. We've seen the amount of alcohol consumption has increased since the pandemic began, and we also are seeing more people drinking in their home versus out in bars and restaurants, which could impact the availability and access that young people have to it. And policy and enforcement are other considerations too, also connected to COVID. we saw that the alcohol industry was deemed an essential industry, right? So while other businesses had to close and shutter, we still had, regular access to alcohol. So these considerations are important when we think about other substances, and I'm specifically thinking about cannabis in this case, especially with the recent legalization in Connecticut of adult use cannabis. Community norms, access, enforcement, and policy. These are all going to become increasingly important factors when we think about that as well. Okay, so I have a really quick Zoom poll for everybody. I'm going to go and launch this poll. So we're just trying to see what you know about alcohol use. So about what percentage of Connecticut youth do you think reported drinking alcohol in the past 30 days? Give people a second, so I'm taking it. All right, looks like most people have answered. So it looks like most of you would say 35%, with 25% being the second choice. And it's actually 25.9% as of 2019. So that's a quarter of our teens, right? That's higher than we would like to see it for sure, right? We don't want any of our young people being exposed to the harmful effects of underage drinking. However, it is worth noting that that rate has been cut in half in about 20 years, right? In 1997, that was 52% of our young people saying that they drank in the last 30 years. I see in the chat, yes, this is high school teens only, correct. Right, and now we've gotten that number down to 25. So that means we've made a lot of progress here, which is really great to see. Our efforts are working and we should continue them, right? Prevention is working. We will be sharing the slides, yes. We'll share this whole recording actually with everyone. So in addition to this, the last two statistics that are on there refer to binge drinking and riding with a driver who had been drinking, right? Which we know that consuming alcohol in itself could be damaging enough, but it also increases the chance that young people are going to make risky decisions like binge drinking or riding with someone who is drinking. And I'm really excited, especially about the decrease in the number of young people driving with a driver who had been drinking. That was 38% in 1997, and it's slashed down to 14% in 2019. So this is really, really promising information, and we're very happy to see those trends. Additionally, it's worth noting, shout out to Connecticut teens, that they're drinking at rates slightly lower than the national average as well. This doesn't mean that we can sort of rest on our laurels. We still have work to be done, but it's promising that what we're doing is having an effect, and it's really working. So it's important too that we look at this data and we break it down a little bit to better understand how specific populations of our young people are experiencing. And when we do that, we can see that unfortunately females and youth who identify as LGBTQ are consuming substances at increased rates, at higher rates than the general population of adolescents. And males, interestingly, are consuming at lower rates than the average too. We see females consuming or about 29% of females had said that they drank alcohol in the last 30 days, and 33, a whole third of the youth who are identifying as LGBTQ reported that they had consumed alcohol, and the patterns hold true for binge drinking as well too. So, this is unfortunate, but it really speaks to the need for us to have targeted interventions, right? That we're kind of dialing into the specific experiences and circumstances of different populations and understanding what it is that's affecting them and coming up with supports and interventions that specifically speak to those experiences. So I'm sure that I don't have to convince anybody on this call that underage drinking has a lot of negative consequences. However, it's important that we have some understanding of what those specifics are. So we see youth who drink alcohol have higher rates of school absence and lower grades. We know that alcohol consumption in general can lead to increases in aggression and violence, especially sexual violence too. Young people who consume alcohol are at an increased risk for accidental injuries, We know that there's massive brain development happening in this time, so consuming alcohol can impact the brain development and cause changes that might have lasting effects. Alcohol poisoning is also a specific concern for young people. We talked about that prefrontal cortex not being fully developed yet. And that's the part of our brain that helps us with things like impulse control and being able to think through consequences. So not having, the strength in that part of their brain often leads to young people to consume more in each sitting when they are consuming alcohol, which puts them at increased risk for alcohol poisoning. And then finally, it can lead to the use of other substances or misuse of other substances as well. So now we're going to jump into talking about cannabis. So cannabis, like I said, it's definitely an important hot topic for us to discuss today, especially because in Connecticut just last year, the state legislature legalized adult use cannabis. So it's still not legal for young people. You have to be 21 to be able to possess and use. However, it's definitely going to change the landscape, and it's still going to have an effect on our young people. And so up there we have some of the common names for cannabis. You'll see I have an asterisk next to the word marijuana, just to bring attention to the fact that we intentionally use cannabis, which is the scientific name for the plant, because there is a racist history and connotation that is associated with the word marijuana. And we also have some of the common emojis that are listed up there that are often used to represent this as well. Okay, so another opportunity to hear from the audience. So let's talk about this. How do you think that legalization of cannabis in Connecticut might impact our young people? And you can see that there is a picture of a dispensary window that's up there in case you're wondering what you're looking at. Normalization of use, absolutely. Teens think it isn't harmful and changes their perception. Easier access. Increased access through friends and family, absolutely. Parents think it's okay. Yeah, so it's going back to some of those factors I talked about before with community norms and media messaging, so on and so forth. Normalization of use, a lot of people saying that. Yeah, I heard people, or I saw people in the chat speaking to perception of harm, and that's one of the biggest factors that we're looking at right now with cannabis. And we have seen young people's perception of the risk associated with smoking cannabis has been declining for years. So from 2015 to 2020, there was almost a 10 percentage point drop in the number of young people saying that smoking cannabis is great risk, perceiving great risk. And I also have the rates for alcohol and cigarettes up there to show that this drop is pretty unique to cannabis, right? They're not thinking that alcohol is less risky or that cigarettes are less risky. It's cannabis that they're having that perception of. And we know that when there's decreases in perception of risk, that there's a correlated increase in use often. So this is certainly something that we want to pay attention to, and these myths that we want to address with our young people. I go back to this window right here that I think a lot of the ways that cannabis is presented, right? It's often in candy form. That is definitely impacting the perception that young people have of this, that candy is perceived as innocent, right? We associate candy with children all of the time, but it's taking on a totally different dynamic now with this. And I also think about the path that cannabis took to legalization, that it started with medical cannabis first, right? So now it's candy, and then it's something that is prescribed by your doctor. And all of these factors are definitely influencing the way that our young people perceive cannabis. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so we know that this lower perception of risk from cannabis use is a myth, that it's misplaced. We know that there are negative effects that come from cannabis. In the short term, it's the sedation, drowsiness, increased appetite, things like that we often associate with that. But often also impaired judgment. It can impact your coordination and balance. Another really important factor to point out too is the confusion, anxiety, and paranoia. Those are also like really serious consequences that can come from cannabis use, and they're seeing increases of reports of people experiencing anxiety and paranoia when they are consuming really high levels of THC. And we'll talk more about that too. And then also respiratory ailments if people are smoking. And then additionally, there's long-term effects that come from that. Brain health, we talked about the rapid brain development happening during adolescence. That's definitely going to be impacted by consuming cannabis. Mental health additionally, right? There's this perception that smoking cannabis can help to lower people's anxiety, but in the long term, that's actually not true. And research shows that in the long term, smoking cannabis actually increases people's anxiety and can make it worse. Long term, it can affect athletic performance, again, speaking to the impacts on coordination and balance, things like that. Driving is along the same lines. And overall daily life, people who are regular users of cannabis often report lower life satisfaction. So there's, along with the waves of legalization that are happening across the country these days, there's a lot of new products and ways to consume that are becoming available. So there's 4 main ways that cannabis is consumed: inhalation, orally through cannabis concentrates, or topical administration. We're going to dive a little bit into each of these, but first, another really important thing to talk about is the differences in THC potency of today's cannabis compared to, from the 1990s. So according to the DEA, in the 1990s, the typical cannabis they were taking off the streets had about 4% THC, but by 2018, that had increased to more than 15%. And the products that are available through dispensaries often have even higher levels of THC, and concentrates we'll see can sometimes be up to 99% THC. So we're going to start talking about inhalation. So smoking is by far the most common way to consume cannabis still today. So here we're talking about joints, blunts. You can see a water bong all the way to the right there. And then in the center, those are 2 different sort of discrete pipes. Examples, there's lots of different ways that these can look. But for example, that black piece next to the highlighter, that's the pipe, and that can actually fit inside of that highlighter. So, if you were to see that in your child's backpack or something like that, you might not think twice about it, right? It really looks just like a regular highlighter. And then the ones on the right, that's actually keychain flashlights that are working flashlights that you can screw those apart. And then in the middle center part, use that as a pipe to be able to smoke. So these are just a couple of the examples of, the ways that it's showing up today, that it can be really discreet, that at first glance, you might not really know what it is that you're looking at. And then additionally, it's becoming increasingly common for teens to be vaping cannabis. According to a study done by JAMA Pediatrics, they saw that between 2013 and 2020, there was almost a 7-fold increase in the number of young people saying that they had vaped cannabis in the last 30 days. So that's a really drastic increase in a short amount of time. And in addition to it being concerning, just because we don't really want our young people smoking cannabis, they also tend to hack and modify the vapes that they're using when they smoke for cannabis. So there's increased risk of malfunction. And if you have ever seen some of the consequences of that, sometimes these devices can literally blow up in people's faces and cause some really serious damage. So it's really dangerous when they do that, and not something that we want to see to continue. Next, another increasingly popular form of consumption for cannabis is through edibles. So virtually anything that you can put butter or oil in, you can infuse with THC. These are, risky and concerning for a couple of reasons. One being that it's really difficult for a lot of people to ascertain what the serving size is that they're using. To sit down and eat an entire chocolate bar, that's just a chocolate bar, is probably not a big deal. But if it's infused with THC, that's a pretty big dose, and you don't want to consume the whole thing in one sitting. And many people struggle really to understand the packaging and the way that it's described and to know what an appropriate dose is. I heard on a call we were on last week with some law intelligence, drug intelligence officers saying that they're seeing increases of young people seeking medical attention and coming to ERs because they consumed too much edibles. They didn't know what their dosage was. Another factor in this is the delayed onset, also, that when you're smoking cannabis, you can feel the effects within minutes. It doesn't take much time at all. However, when you're ingesting edibles, it can be 1 to 3 hours before the effects are being felt. So sometimes people, consume and then feel that, well, this isn't doing anything, so I'm going to take more, right? And then they keep doing that, and then they've exceeded their limit and taken too much. And it turns into a THC overdose situation. Additionally, there's tinctures. That's the little bottle that's to your right there. Those are alcohol-based type of things that you can infuse with THC or CBD. I don't believe that they're all that popular with young people, but they're still out there, so it's something to be aware of. All right, so we're going to play another little game here. You see 8 gummies on your screen. 4 of them have THC in them, and 4 of them do not. Do you want to take a guess in the chat which ones you think have THC? It should be either the right or the left. Okay, so there's a lot of people saying the right, but there's a mix. No idea, they look the same. Yeah, and that's exactly the point, that you're not able to determine. It is the ones on the right for those you had a 50-50 shot of getting it right. Yeah, so that's the point, is that especially when they're out of packaging, it's nearly impossible to be able to tell which ones have THC and which ones don't. And especially for young children, they're not going to be able to tell the difference. So the consideration is that if you have an adult in your home who is consuming edibles, just make sure that they're paying attention to what they have and that they are securing them, securely storing them, so that they're not in reach of young children, that they're not able to get to them and accidentally consume something that they think is just a gummy bear. Okay, so moving into the third form of cannabis, which is cannabis concentrates. This is also called dabbing. So this can look a couple of different ways. It can be what they call hash or honey oil. It's kind of a gooey substance you see on your screen. It's also called wax or butter. It looks like lip balmy, it's soft, or it can be shatter, which is a hard solid substance. Like you'd be able to just crack that right in half. So the problem with these is that they have extremely high potencies of THC, most between 40 and 80%, but I've definitely heard reports that there's products available that are up to 99% THC. I've also seen reports that sometimes people try and make these at home, which is not a good idea. They use chemicals to be able to dissolve the plant matter that's on there, chemicals such as butane, for example. And then all that's left is this concentrated form of THC, what you're seeing there. So it doesn't sound like a very healthy or appetizing process that they even have to go through to produce this product. And then additionally, users say that they can have a high that lasts for up to 24 hours or even longer in some cases. So it's with these really high potency THCs that we're seeing some of the worst effects of cannabis consumption, with young people seeking medical attention because they're having an overdose, which an overdose in cannabis doesn't look like what we would normally think of as an overdose, like somebody who is unconscious, laying on the floor, something like that. An overdose for cannabis more looks like detachment from reality, that there is extreme anxiety, paranoia, sometimes hallucinations, things along those lines. And then, with concentrates, there's also some specific paraphernalia that's associated with them. The substances are actually really sticky, so it's common for people to use these silicone dab containers that it won't get all stuck and stick on the inside. And you can also see in that little tie-dye one that there's a metal piece that's in there that would be used to like handle and manipulate the actual concentrate. Additionally, a dab rig is a common way to be able to smoke this. So one of the things about the concentrates is that you have to heat them to a really high level in order for them to combust. So a regular lighter won't do it. They need to use a butane lighter. So you'll see people that will heat up like this little cup piece right here. Sometimes there'll be like a metal piece in there. They get that really hot, put the concentrate product into contact with that. That's what makes it combust and turn into a vapor. And then they would smoke it through this mouthpiece over here. And then finally, there's also things like this dab kit that's here that provides you everything that you might need to be able to use a concentrate. So all of this handy little pack. So here, what I'm circling on your screen, that's the nail piece, that's what you would heat up and then put into contact with the concentrate. And up here is where the mouthpiece is that you would inhale from. But you can also see it contains the little silicone containers, the metal piece to manipulate, and then also a butane lighter. Everything right there that you would need. And that dab kit only costs about $30. You can buy it right on Amazon. And then finally, there's also topical administration of cannabis. So here we're talking about lotions, salves, oils that usually most often have CBD, but they can also have THC in them. This isn't all that popular. It's not a good way if you're trying to get the psychoactive compounds, if you're trying to get the high from using cannabis. This isn't the most effective way to do it, but it's definitely stuff that is still out there and that is still available. So it's important for us to be aware of. All right, now we're going to jump into vaping, and we actually have another quick poll for everybody. So give me a second, I will launch this poll. So about what percentage of high school youth do you think have ever tried vaping? December. So some common names while people are doing that for vapes: cloud pens, e-hookahs, e-cigarettes, mods, tanks, electronic nicotine delivery systems. You can see the picture on your screen that they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. They're often colorful and sleek designs. All right, so it looks like a lot of people have answered, and 44% is the top answer, with 63 being number 2, and you guys are correct. About 44.8% of young people in Connecticut have said that they have ever tried vapor products, but 27% say that they are current users. So that's concerning. More than a quarter of our young people saying that they currently smoke vape products, compared to cigarettes, for example, which had been declining and declining right down to 3.7%. So it's really unfortunate that we're seeing a whole new generation of people becoming addicted to nicotine and being hooked on tobacco products. So this is certainly something that's worth paying attention to, and we don't want to undo all of the progress that had been made over decades. So these vapes come in sort of 3 different categories. You can see on your screen, there's tanks or mods, there's rechargeable e-cigarettes, and then there's also disposable e-cigarettes, which are exploding in popularity right now, which we'll talk to momentarily. So very briefly, just anatomy of a vape pen. There's 4 main components in pretty much all vapes. There's going to be a battery that's used to power the device, sometimes rechargeable, sometimes not. There's an atomizer, which is the device that would heat the e-liquid and turns it into an aerosol. Then there's the cartridge where you put the e-liquid in, or you can even sometimes put cannabis flower into those and smoke that through there too. And then there'll be a mouthpiece that is where the user would inhale from. So why have vapes really exploded in popularity? Well, there's some really intentional marketing and advertising practices that many people are pointing to as being responsible for this. So you can see I have an ad from Juul up there, and they have come under fire in recent years for some of their advertising practices that are directly appealing to young people, really pulling from the playbook of big tobacco, using themes of like sex and rebellion and independence. They have young, attractive models that are pushing their products, lots of colorful advertisements, things like that. In addition, we also know that a lot of the e-cigarettes come in fun flavors such as fruit and candy, mint, menthol, things like that. In fact, almost 85% of young people who use e-cigarettes said that they use the flavored varieties. Now, it is true that the FDA instituted a ban last year on flavored tobacco products. However, there's a number of really big loopholes in the regulations that they put forth. So for example, puff bars are up on your screen. That's an example of a disposable e-cigarette, and disposable e-cigarettes were not included in the FDA ban, which I assume is part of the reason that they're gaining in popularity among young people, because that is what is available to them. So you can see they come in flavors like OMG, which is orange mango guava, or Lush Ice, for example, direct appeal to young people. On the left of the screen is another example of a loophole there, that refillable pods and cartridges, you can still get those in flavored varieties as well. Smoke is an example of a brand that produces the refillable pods and what some of their devices look like. They have fun designs, right? I think that's the mermaid pattern that we know our young people really like. So it's pretty hard to argue that these aren't directed towards young people. And I think that they have also had a huge influence on the perception and the understanding that our young people have of the dangers of these products. In fact, there's a huge perception that vapes are safer than cigarettes. And there's really not any evidence to back that up. Most e-cigarettes contain nicotine, and they contain really high levels of nicotine as well. Nicotine is the addictive ingredient that is derived from tobacco products. And we know that nicotine can impact brain development. It can impact people's ability to learn and to remember. A lot of people perceive that vapes can be used to cut down on traditional tobacco cigarettes. However, the FDA has not found any evidence that e-cigarettes are safe or effective for helping tobacco users quit. And in fact, we find that young people who use e-cigarettes are also more likely to smoke regular cigarettes or to eventually transition to smoking regular cigarettes. So these are huge myths, and a lot of these misconceptions, I would point directly at the marketing and advertising that was used around these products. Another example, this is where we'll end with vaping, is calling them vapes at all, because that's misleading, right? A vapor kind of gives the impression that it's something like water turning into steam, right? That will then just dissipate into the air, and that's it. You won't see it anymore. But it's actually not a vapor that is released from these devices. It's more like an aerosol. So an aerosol would be particles suspended in air. The best example I can give is of aerosol hairspray. I remember back in my middle school years, I had bangs back then that I would curl and then use my aerosol hairspray to get them nice and crispy. But what would happen is all that hairspray that went into the air, it didn't just disappear. It fell down and settled on the vanity and the bathroom floor, creating like a sticky, got hairspray all over it, a sticky film, something like that, that we had to clean up. Well, it's a similar thing that happens with these products as well, right? The dangerous chemicals, the carcinogens, the nicotine, ultrafine particles that are contained in those cartridges, they come out as an aerosol when they're released from the devices, and then eventually settle in the air and settle on all the surfaces around them. So, it's probably a pretty intentional choice to use the word vapor versus aerosol, because it gives you a different connotation. So something to think about. All right, so now we're gonna talk about prescription pill misuse. So a huge problem that we're seeing right now is the number of counterfeit pills that are being flooded into the illicit market and into the country. So we're gonna start by playing a little game. We have some pills up on your screen. So which ones do you think are the real versus the counterfeit pills? Is it the right or the left? You can put your guesses in the chat. Lots of people saying the left. Same as before, it cannot be determined. I'll give you a couple more examples. Here's some Xanax and another Oxy. Yes, they look the same. So it is actually the ones on the right that were the counterfeit pills, but like many people suggested in the chat, the point is that you really can't tell. You can't tell just by looking at them which ones are real and which ones are counterfeit. And a real concerning point of this is that there's been an increase in the number of pills that the DEA is taking off the street that contain a lethal dose of fentanyl in them. So in September last year, they released an advisory actually saying that they're estimating about 40% based on their lab testing, 40% of the pills that they took off the street contained a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl. So this is a major contributor that's driving the overdose epidemic that we're experiencing in the country right now. And their campaign of one pill can kill is absolutely true, and it's spot on. Many of these counterfeit pills that are being brought into the country, they're not made in labs that have any kind of quality controls in them. They're makeshift labs. So oftentimes there's very inconsistent cuts in the batches. So, one batch might have some pills that have a really low amount of fentanyl, and then others from the same batch have a high fatal dosage of fentanyl in them. So on your screen, you can see some of the rates of use of young people in Connecticut who say that they took a prescription pain medicine without a prescription from a doctor or differently than how a doctor told them to use it. So overall, we see about 10% of teens in Connecticut, high school students, saying that they have misused a prescription. But troublingly, if you look down at the last line, that our LGBTQ plus youth are misusing prescription pills at almost twice the rates of the general population. So again, it speaks to the need to really understand and provide targeted interventions for young people that are addressing their specific needs. So we know that most young people, about 2/3 of them, say that they get pain relievers from their family members or from their friends. However, the DEA is reporting that the dark web and social media are becoming increasingly common sources to be able to access these counterfeit pills. And you can see there's some emojis that they put out in September with related to common prescriptions. So there's Percocet, is the pill or the blue dot, a pea, a banana. Xanax has the pill again, a chocolate bar or a bus. Then there's Aerosol, the spaceship or the bomb or the firecracker for high potency, so on and so forth. So there's three main categories of prescription pills that we're looking at now. The first is depressants or tranquilizers. So these are called benzos or downers often on the street. The common prescriptions are Xanax and Valium. Then we also have stimulants, which are known as bennies or speed sometimes, crank. And the common prescriptions are Adderall and Ritalin. And then finally, opioid pain pills. So these are hillbilly heroin or Oxy, Percocet, Roxy, the common prescriptions being OxyContin, Percocet, and Vicodin. I did want to take a moment just to talk a little bit about fentanyl, since it is a really concerning trend that we're seeing happening right now. It's definitely in the news very often. So fentanyl is a type of opioid. It's a synthetic opioid. It is 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin. The really appealing thing to drug dealers is that fentanyl is very inexpensive. It's very cheap. But one of the differences is that you can tell by the picture there, those two vials show a lethal dose of each of those substances. So you need a very, very small amount of fentanyl to cause a lethal dose. They say that the amount can fit on a pencil tip. Additionally, fentanyl can be consumed in a number of ways. It can be injected, smoked, sniffed, sorted, or taken in pill form. So what can we do? Well, if you have prescriptions in your home, make sure that you monitor use and securely store them. Someone's asking about car fentanyl. I have not heard, I've heard of that, but I have not heard a lot of reports that that's something that they're seeing a ton of. It seems to be fentanyl is the really, really big piece of it. So definitely something I'll watch out for, but I know all of the advisories that the DEA has been putting out are very specifically speaking to fentanyl. Good question, Phil. So if you have prescription pills, make sure that you're monitoring use and securely storing them, right? So have awareness of how many pills you have and how many that you've taken, what's left, and make sure that they are put away in a secure place. I see questions, so I'm just going to take a minute to address them. Is it true kids are using fentanyl in a vape? I haven't heard specifically about using fentanyl in a vape. There have been reports, for instance, last year, Connecticut had the first lab confirmed case of cannabis that was tainted with fentanyl. However, we were on a call last week with some drug intelligence officers, and through their investigations, they're saying that they don't think that there is intentional contamination that's happening, that it's most likely accidental, that the substances were handled on the same surface, or somebody had things in their hands, things like that. Young people talk about fentanyl cartridges. I am not aware of that. That's something I'll definitely look up. So yeah, so I will look into that. And when we send out our resources, I'll let you know if I'm able to find any more information about that. But I haven't heard of fentanyl being really packaged or used in that way before. It's not something that I have come across. All right, so back to the prescription pills. So making sure that you monitor use and safely secure them. If you do have leftover pills, to make sure that you are safely disposing of those. Safe disposal can look like using something like a product like Doterra, for example. So this is a bag that will deactivate any prescription drugs. You just open it, put the pills in. I think you add water or something to it, and it deactivates the prescription. Also, most police stations have drug take back days that they sponsor, or they have drop boxes outside of their police department that you can just go and bring your prescriptions and securely dispose of them that way. So definitely make sure that you are, putting in the effort to securely dispose of any unused medications. Definitely don't flush them down the toilet or just throw them in the garbage. That's not a great way to be able to dispose of them. And then finally, if you have somebody in your life or somebody who is struggling specifically with opioid use disorder, it's a great idea to be prepared with naloxone. Naloxone is a drug that is used to reverse opioid overdoses. There's also an app that was created by the Connecticut Department of Public Health called NoraSaves.com. And NoraSaves is all the information that you need to know about how to administer and when to use. It can give you signs of an opioid overdose, and you don't need a prescription to be able to get this. There are many pharmacies in Connecticut with the appropriate certifications to be able to administer the prescription. You just have to go and ask for it, and you can get it that way. And then additionally, there's a great resource website called youthinkyouKnowCT.org that gives a lot of information about prescription pills and other drugs as well. Some of the social media components of youth substance use, they talk about that on there. It's a really great resource. In addition, there's Live Loud for people who are living with opioid use disorder. To the right, that's Live Loud for people who are struggling themselves with opioid use disorder. And then on the left, there's also a website dedicated to families also, and people who are supporting loved ones going through opioid use disorder. So now we're going to talk briefly about what are some of the things that you can do. So I have a question. If you could reduce a youth's likelihood of using drugs by 50%, would you do it? I would guess that most people in this meeting would say yes. Well, we have yes, a great statistic that Youth who learn about the risk of substances at home or from an adult that they care about are up to 50% less likely to use them. So that's a really easy way for us to cut down on the number of our young people who are using substances. And having conversations, it's not an easy thing. I'm not going to make it seem like it's, just a walk in the park type of thing. However, it's something that gets easier with practice. So talking early and talking often about substance use with your young people can go a really long way. So make conversations like this an everyday practice, right? I encourage you to be really curious and ask open-ended questions. Show non-judgment, so validate their opinions and validate their experiences, and help them to understand and make sense of what they're experiencing. Young people also respond really well to credible information. So maybe if you have questions or if they have questions, you can go together to the CDC website or the National Institute on Drug Abuse, for example. They actually have a whole website dedicated to teens that is really useful and has a lot of information that's presented in a way that's acceptable or appealing to young people. Next, discuss motivations with them. So young people, there's a variety of reasons why young people say that they might use drugs. It could be to experiment, to relieve pain, stress, anxiety, just to cure boredom, right? So talk about those reasons. What drives people to try drugs and to use substances? But then on the flip side, I would also talk about what are their reasons to not use drugs? What are the things that they want out of their life and the things that are important to them that substance use might get in the way of or might negatively impact. Additionally, be really explicit and clear about how you feel. Having very clear expectations and boundaries. Those are things that help young people to feel safe and secure. They're never going to ask for boundaries, but they want them because it helps them to know what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. So use teachable moments as they come up. Maybe you're seeing a TV show or a movie, something like that, discussing things that you're seeing in the news. Help them to make sense and to understand what they're seeing and what's happening in the world. Additionally, emphasize the dangers of substance use. Make sure that you are clear that even prescriptions can carry the risk of addiction. And that we have to be careful how we're using drugs, right? Not combining different substances together that can increase the risk of negative outcomes happening. And that even with prescriptions, the opioids in particular, withdrawal symptoms can happen after only a few uses. And then finally, even if you have used substances in the past, don't be afraid to speak up. It's about their future and not your past. Conversations about things like addiction or if people in your family have had substance use issues, it can be really difficult to talk about. However, helping our young people to make sense of these and to understand, right, that can do a lot to influence their decision making and the choices that they're making for their own lives. So in addition to youth that are in your own home or in your own circle, you can bring the partnership to your community. The Governor's Prevention Partnership would love to come and help work in your community to advance prevention and mentoring there. We can provide prevention workshops such as the one that you just watched today. In other presentations, we have done community conversations in the past and expert panels. Additionally, if you are from a school or a youth serving organization, we have a prevention program for high school students called E3, Encourage, Empower, Engage. And this program uses a peer-to-peer model. So we work with adult advisors to train and equip teens to be facilitators and to facilitate prevention workshops to the young people in their community. So if you're interested in partnering with us and bringing any of these presentations to your community or to starting an E3 program, we'd really love to hear from you. And my contact information will be included in this presentation as well. And then additionally, we have some other resources, great places that you can go to get more information. Some of them I've mentioned already, but the Connecticut Clearinghouse is a great resource. 211 is also another one that you can go for options. All right, and now we will have some time for questions. I am going to just launch a poll really quick. So I'll go ahead and launch the poll, which you can do. And in the meantime, while people are working on that, if there are any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I would be happy to talk through them with you. And thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that this is valuable for you. I'll leave, there's my contact information there in case anybody is interested. Feel free to email or to call if you're interested in partnering or bringing E3. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There's my contact information right up there. Emailing me is probably the best way if you are interested in any of our services, especially E3. Okay, so it looks like I'm not seeing any other questions coming through here. So thanks so much for your time, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. And we're gonna end with that for today. So thank you. Have a really great day. Bye.